Hi, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you now. All right, and into presentation mode. Jane, can you confirm for me that you can see my screen and not my notes?
I can see your screen and not your notes. You're all good.
Amazing. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today. Weird times to be doing this work, but I'm really looking forward to being with you here for the next 20 minutes or so. So a little bit about me. I've been working around scaling organizations in a more inclusive way for the last nearly 20 years now. My last job, I worked in-house for Tom Steyer's organizations before that whole presidential thing, running HR for one of the largest Democratic super PACs in the country. And I'm currently the Chief Operating Officer at ReadySet. ReadySet is a high-touch consulting firm, and we specialize in making more equitable, diverse, and inclusive environments. I do want to talk for a minute about what I'm not. What I'm not is a health professional or a mental health professional. I have done a lot of crisis intervention work, and so I do use that lens. But we got to remember that when we're talking about COVID-19 stuff, I just always want to remind us that we want to come back to those professionals because this is such an emergent situation. It could get better, it could get worse. And what I'm going to be focusing on today is the equity and inclusion angle when it comes to the crisis and how a lot of that really relates to, for some people, an existing reality, and for some people, a very new reality with distributed remote virtual work, whatever we're calling it. So I have a question for you. I know we've all been thinking a lot about our team's physical safety, right? We're all virtual today because we want to make sure that folks are safe, folks are taking social distancing really seriously for the common good. What have you been doing so far in terms of thinking about your team's mental health? And I'd love for you to just put in the chat things that you've done, things that you've been thinking about at your organizations to take into consideration how your team is doing from a mental health perspective. All right, just go ahead and put that in the chat box. Daily check-in, great, so someone from Trebuchet Group. Oh, it's moving so quickly. Routine pulse checks, love it. Virtual check-ins, ooh, multiplayer games for some fun. Dedicated wellness time, self-awareness training, oh, I love it. Meditating before meetings. Virtual happy hours, oh, amazing. I'm loving all of these things.
We'll capture this as a list too and share it out later so you can all share in one another's hot tips.
This is fabulous. And we're gonna also see some of these reflected in the next couple of slides. You have a bunch that I haven't thought of, which is why I love doing these kind of workshops, because I learn new things. Oh, theme clothing days. Yes, I've been thinking about doing like a onesie day. That seems like a good idea, or a Tutu Tuesday kind of a thing. A lot of us have little kids, or a few of us have little kids, and my daughter is all tutus all the time right now. Fabulous. So I want to name also here that the epidemic, the crisis, can affect people in different ways, right? We're not all facing some of the same challenges. It may be affecting parents differently, caregivers differently, people with existing mental health issues differently, folks who are immunocompromised, folks who are older, et cetera, et cetera. So the mental health implications aren't the same for everybody. Really important that we're talking about this stuff. So sort of related but different, I want to talk about what we've been seeing in the world when it comes to bias, when it comes to racism, xenophobia, discrimination. What have you been seeing either at work or just out in the world through the news? What have you been hearing about when you've been on CNN or on other news sources, checking your Facebook feed? What have you been hearing about in terms of bias going on in the world? Go ahead and put that in the chat slide. Getting verbally attacked for being young and out in public, right? So we're seeing ageism in both directions, young people and old people. What else are we seeing? A lot of ageism we've got. Asian flu, right? We have a lot of references, including, from the president around how this is the Chinese virus, happened to originate in China. We're seeing xenophobia, blaming Asians. Yeah, I see another Chinese virus. Yeah, so we've been seeing people making assumptions about where the bias came from and who's to blame, right? Absolutely. Absolutely. So we have been seeing a lot going on. We've seen a rise in hate crimes. We've seen Asian Americans be physically assaulted. We've seen verbal harassments all over the world. We've seen TSA agents involved in verbal harassment. Prior to some of the sort of more stringent social distancing, we were seeing Chinese restaurants really suffer because of a perception of Chinese food being, Chinese people or food being unclean. And what's happening here is that news of the coronavirus is really, really amplifying a lot of existing stuff that's already been going on, right? There's something called xenophobia, which is a specific form of bigotry. That's hostility against China. It's people of Chinese descent or Chinese culture. And that goes back to the 1800s, right? That goes back to the Chinese Exclusion Act that barred Chinese laborers for coming to the US for 10 years. So we're seeing an exacerbation of stuff that was sort of under the surface, and we're seeing new stuff come up as well. We're also seeing a lot of perceptions around ableism, right? Not all disabilities are visible. People who are immunocompromised and who have other underlying health conditions are more susceptible to this virus. And we're seeing a number of people have said a lot of incidents of ageism as well. I see some people sort of getting into some of the organizational dynamics that you might be witnessing at work as well. Because I guarantee you that though some of these more extreme forms of bias and discrimination are probably more visible sort of when we're hearing them from the news, a physical assault is different, right? Although also problematic when we're talking about a verbal assault, but we have stuff happening in our workplaces as well. Someone mentioned on this list sort of extroverts and consensus of the loudest, the fact that the loudest people get heard in crises like this. And we can see these kind of dynamics from the outside world showing up in our workforces as well, in our Slacks, in our Zooms, in disparaging statements that are made, in erasing over different identities, and ignoring folks who are going to be affected from a lived experience perspective in a very different way than other folks. So what do we do about this? Well, this is by no means an exhaustive list, but at ReadySet, we focus on making more diverse, equitable, and inclusive organizations. And we've been thinking about this work in the context of COVID-19, but prior as well, how bias shows up in the workplace. So some thoughts, not an exhaustive list, would love to hear ideas from you as well on sort of what we can do. So the first bucket I want to talk about is about consistent and proactive internal communication, right? We want to make sure that we're talking to our folks on a regular cadence, right? This is really emergent. It could get worse before it gets better. This is totally unprecedented. We don't know what's going to happen. We want to make sure that we're talking to people. And we want to make sure that we're talking to our staff without ignoring some of the folks who may be most affected by this. There's a great disability activist, Charles Hill, who recently wrote an article where she quoted sort of what a lot of comms have looked like. She summarized this quote as, "Don't panic, just wash your hands and only the sick will die anyway." Right, and so we've seen that sort of show up in communications, internal communications, external communications, not, I don't think, for the most part in an ill-intentioned way, and of course not using those exact words, but this idea that as we're trying to de-stress people, take away some of the fear, we're erasing over the realities of some people who are likely to be more affected. So let's make sure that we include everybody in our communications. Really encourage you to share mental health resources, right? I'm an HR professional. I always get nervous about sending out resources that I don't know super well, but national hotlines are always a really good one to include because they've been sort of vetted at a good, thorough level. Employee resource plan offerings, another really good option. Articles, helplines that have texting or virtual options as well. Or if you have mental health coverage in your health plans, that can be another really good thing to highlight for folks. Revise your policies, right, and communicate about them. At ReadySet now, we're on unlimited sick leave. We switched to that because it seemed like the right thing to do. We wanted people not to be stressed out if they got sick or if they were dealing with mental health issues, right? And really communicate about them. We want to make sure that we're also talking to caregivers when schools are closed. I don't have childcare until I don't know when at this point, and so we've been revising that. That's a huge challenge for us. Second category here is about making space for discussion and learning, right? We want to have all staff meetings. We want to have dedicated spaces, office hours. We want to train folks and be talking about xenophobia, bias, and discrimination. Now it's actually kind of a good time in a weird way to do virtual trainings because folks are looking for connection. They want to talk to each other. We also want to make sure we're being really authentic and really clear on what's known in the situation and what's not, right? We don't know what's going to happen. And the worst thing that we can do as leaders, as HR people, as individual contributors trying to support our peers is to be sort of BSy about it, right? Another sort of bucket here, our managers are so helpful in these situations, right? They're the ones who are talking to the most people. They are talking to people more senior, more junior. They're really on the front line. So let's make sure they really understand the changes to protocols, right? And what this is going to look like. Let's make sure that they understand issues when it comes to confidentiality. A lot of people make disclosures during times like this. If you're in the US, making a health disclosure results in needing to have a conversation about reasonable accommodations. Not everybody knows that, but that's something that we have to be doing and we have to be training our managers on. Get your managers to check in a lot, right? We want them to check in even more than they were before, especially if virtual is a new thing for your team. And incorporate emotions-based check-ins, right? This is just good management 101 stuff, but asking their direct report how they're feeling and really caring about the answer. Asking their direct report what they can do to support them this week. Some more thoughts for you. Values, right? Jane and Bud talked about coming back to culture, right? And this isn't just about picking the right tools. This is about how we change the culture, how we stick to what works, how we make changes. Come back to your culture and your values. Is transparency a value at your organization? Then let's be really transparent about what we know, what we don't know, what the expectations are. When we screw up, when we got to go a different direction, let's be really transparent about that as well. That connects to giving folks the why too. I have so many conversations with organizations where they think that like senior leaders are doing all the secret stuff in the back room and it's so exciting. It's just because it's not shared with the team, right? So we want to make sure that we're sharing the why behind the decisions that we're making. It can be really hard, right? We're balancing business outcomes. A lot of us are really concerned about the recession with the ethics, with the health implications, with equity concerns. So letting folks know how we're coming to the decisions that we are. Rituals are great right now. You can change them up, you can create new ones, but they're really important to give people that touch point, right? Regular moments where everyone's together. Allyship, I could spend 3 hours on this. You're gonna see bias in your organizations, it's gonna happen. You're gonna see someone make a disparaging comment about an ethnic group. Name it. I'm not sure if you meant it this way, but I just heard, or if you're not comfortable dealing with it in real time, tell someone, tell your people ops or your HR department, tell your manager. We've got to get ahead of this because it's going to get increasingly exacerbated in virtual formats.
Yeah, and I think just to build on that point, I think the way you frame that is so important, is giving people the out and saying, I'm not sure if you meant it that way, to start the conversation from a place that does feel like positive intent and a good starting point. So that people can say like, oh, actually, no, I didn't. Let me back off of that and restate how I might say that. They're not on their heels for the second.
Absolutely. I think what we say at ReadySet is assume good intent, but own impact, right? Absolutely.
Yeah. I also just want to ask people to start popping in questions into the Q&A or the chat so we can answer some questions before Rachel hops off when we start our next session. Here.
Thanks, Jane. Couple more here. Advocate for training spaces. We talked about training. Now is actually a really great time to talk about this stuff. And create opportunities for impacted individuals to talk to each other. Employee resource groups, Slack channels, other ways. Let's try and do our best to address fear proactively. Let's try and stay away from calling out specific groups. And let's assure staff that we're trying to make the best decisions for the business, but that we're going to also be weighing health decisions, ethical decisions over some of the short-term business interests at this time. Clear expectations from work from home. This is going to evolve. This doesn't need to be a thing that you create a list one day and it changes, but like do those norms, do those individual level norms, do those group norms. Try and find that balance between flexibility and consistency, right? Consider some stipends if you have the money, right? Work from home is really easier for some people than other people. Let's normalize those kids popping up in the background, like that BBC video, right? 'Cause it's gonna happen. Let's also acknowledge that it's like harder and different from some people than others. I could spend an hour on running inclusive meetings, but just a couple like quick tips. Check-ins and icebreakers are great. They gotta feel genuine. If it doesn't feel like part of your company culture, maybe this is an opportunity to make it part of your company culture. Use some humor, checking in on how people are doing at the beginning of meetings, especially during times like that. This, I think, is really important. Remember that staff who take up less space in real life, those ones who don't say a lot in meetings, maybe because they're introverts, maybe because of social identity issues, are even less likely to take up this space in virtual formats, because we all love that unmuting dance that we have to do, right? Like everyone hates that. And the introverts are gonna have an even harder time with that. So really encourage you to use a speakers list to organize who's on stack, who's gonna be the next one speaking, and to openly invite, hey, I'd love to hear from someone who I haven't heard from yet. Last category for you, because I know we're running out of time. Social time's so important. You all had great ideas in the mental health prompt a little bit earlier. We're doing Zoom lunches at ReadySet. We also, at our all staff, we typically had food, and so now we're having people order in. That's still allowed in San Francisco. We'll see how long it's allowed for, but it's allowed right now. And there's lots of other ways that we can be creative. Virtual trivia, people said meditation, lots of these opportunities for some fun, for some creativity, and for abilities to connect. We know that working from home can be incredibly isolating, in particular for people who are not used to it. We know that isolation is connected to our immune system. So the more that we can be creating connection, the more that we can be supporting people, the healthier everyone's gonna be. So not an exhaustive list. Those are some thoughts from us at ReadySet and some stuff that we've been hearing from our clients and our other partners. But I'd love to answer some questions or thoughts.
Yeah, we'll be quick. So maybe we'll end on one question. I think this one is like such a big one. I'd love your thoughts on it. So how do you coach managers who are new to having these emotional based conversations, or maybe you're trying to and they feel like they're just kind of getting the like, no, I'm fine, but they know that there's anxiety under the surface? Where do you start?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think that like with everything around people management, it's all a relationship, right? It's all relational. So coming up with those kind of prompts that are going to feel authentic to the manager is really, really important. We don't want to be having managers ask a very like Northern California question that's not going to feel right in their culture, not going to feel right to them. Sure. So it could just be asking how the person is doing, waiting for the response, pausing for a minute, just to give them some more space. It's an invitation. We don't want to put people on the spot. People also may not want to tell you, and that's fine, right? It is harder for some people to bring their full self to work. And so we don't want to be putting people on the spot either. I think it's really a matter of managers giving those invitations, also maybe doing a little bit of modeling of their own vulnerability if they feel comfortable with that can be a really useful tool.
Amazing. Okay. Thank you so much, Rachel. I was so excited to have you, and I think this is such a useful talk with so many important tidbits that you can already tell because there's so much chatter around like, will we get this deck? So I appreciate you just filling everyone with all of these tips. I think they're huge. And I think in the midst of trying to adapt to this, it's really easy to lose the thread of the inclusion and diversity and equity of our people and how they're being affected by it. Because it's so easy to just focus on the remote work and technical problems and all that other stuff that's going on right now. So thank you again. Really appreciate it.